And our first live guest this morning is former UN Ambassador and South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who's been the most active candidate on the trail these last few days. She's also had her endorser-in-chief, Governor Chris Sununu, with her, hoping it would make a big impression on voters. Ambassador Haley, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So there are few more important attacks in politics than ones involving Social Security benefits and the fears that they will be taken away. You've talked about the need to change Social Security in order to extend it for the long term. So can you be specific today in terms of where you think the retirement age should be for people in their 40s and 30s to ensure solvency through the rest of the century?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump's commercials are just a flat out lie. I've never once said I want to cut Social Security. I think if you got a lot to win, you don't deserve to win. What I have said is we can't put our head in the sand. Social Security will go bankrupt in 10 years. Medicare will go bankrupt in 8. That means we go to those just coming into the system in their 20s, and we say to them, we're going to change the rules for you. We're going to raise the retirement age to reflect life expectancy. We're going to, instead of cost of living increases, do increases based on inflation. We're going to expand Medicare Advantage plans, which seniors love. But America should always keep America's promises to anybody that's paid in. We're not going to cut Social Security for anybody in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or otherwise. We're just going to make sure that we start focusing on how to keep it solvent so that our kids can have a retirement as well.
So that new retirement age for those in their 20s, is it 70, 71? Where are you going to peg that?
I think we have to look and see where it makes sense to have it. I think the other thing is we're going to limit benefits on the mega wealthy. I mean, I think they don't want the checks anyway. That's money that'll come back in. And then I think once we see what the right fit is for those new ones coming in, then we'll know more.
Speaking of older Americans, you have called for cognitive testing for politicians in Washington over 75. What was your reaction when you saw President Donald Trump the other night confusing you and Nancy Pelosi repeatedly on stage?
This isn't the first time. Not only did he confuse and say that I kept security from being at the Capitol on January 6th when I was nowhere near the Capitol, he also said that Joe Biden was going to get us into World War II, which I'm thinking he meant World War III. He said he ran against President Obama, which he didn't. But aside from that, I'm not saying that he is at the level of Joe Biden, but are we really going to have two 80-year-olds running for president? Because we're talking about 4 years of an economy in disarray, a world on fire, and we can't go through any more people that are not at the top of their game. Congress right now is the most privileged nursing home in the country. I mean, I have hit Congress over and over again because we need term limits. We need mental competency tests. I don't care if it's for everybody, but these are people making decisions on our national security. These are people making decisions on the future of our economy. We need to know they're at the top of their game, and that includes our presidential candidates.
You know, this was about January 6th that he was talking about insecurity there. A lot of Republicans, new Washington Post poll, shown that they want to move on. They think that people are making too much of the attack on the Capitol. What about those who are protesting? They might have been there. Maybe they didn't hit a police officer. Maybe they didn't break anything inside the Capitol. If you're the president, would you be okay hiring somebody who was there into your administration?
These were protesters that are doing what we have a God-given freedom to do. You know, I want this to be the live free or die country. And so, yes, you can protest, you can do anything. You break the law, you're going to be held accountable. But we should not go and hurt anyone or punish anyone for saying something they believe in. I think we need to be able to do that. But I think it also goes back to the fact we just don't want any more chaos. I mean, rightly or wrongly, chaos follows Trump. That's been the case. And we need to go and move forward. We need a new generational leader that's going to leave the vendettas and the chaos and the noise behind and focus on the solutions for the future.
So that's a yes, you would be willing to hire them then?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Getting to the White House, obviously, you look very well poised to earn a second place here. The question is where that's going to fall, or maybe a big surprise. Who knows? There's a lot out there still right now. If you're not within single digits, though, how do you make the case to Republican voters that this race should continue in your home state of South Carolina, where you're not doing as well in the polls there as you are here?
Well, first of all, I think that our goal was always, and I've been consistent, we wanted to be strong in Iowa, we want to be stronger in New Hampshire, and we want to be stronger than that in South Carolina. I mean, keep in mind, Donald Trump won 56,000 votes out of 3 million in Iowa. 56,000 doesn't represent the country. Now we're going to come into New Hampshire. We're going to get more representation of the country. And then we're going to go to my state in South Carolina. And you can talk about any polls you want. I won that state twice. I'm very aware of how to run in South Carolina and how to win in South Carolina. And so this is about momentum, and this is about continuing to build. And our goal is if everybody gets out and takes their friends with them, then we think we're going to have a strong day in New Hampshire.
Here in New Hampshire, there's no one issue that unites Republicans more than those pocketbook issues. What assurances can you give GOP primary voters that you're going to hold the line on taxes in Washington, and why should they believe you?
I've never raised a tax in my life. I'm not going to start now. But more than that, I think government makes too much money already. You need an accountant in the White House. I think we've had enough lawyers. I think we've had enough politicians. It's time for an accountant in the White House. What we'll do is we'll claw back the $100 billion of unspent COVID dollars that are out there. We'll go after the hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID fraud. 1 out of every $7 was spent fraudulently. If 8% of our budget is interest, quit borrowing, cut up the credit cards. Everybody has to balance a budget every day. I had to balance a budget as governor. There's no reason Congress can't balance a budget. We'll stop the spending, we'll stop the borrowing, I'll eliminate the earmarks, and we'll veto any spending bill that doesn't take us back to pre-COVID levels. We'll also eliminate the federal gas and diesel tax in this country, and we'll cut taxes on the middle class and make small business tax cuts permanent. It's time that we put cash in people's pockets instead of taking it out.
You say you've never raised a tax. People are seeing something different on the air here, where you're saying one thing about the gas tax in South Carolina and then another.
And Trump says I raised taxes. I did not raise taxes. However, he should acknowledge the fact that he proposed a 25-cent gas tax increase when he was president in 2018. So just because he's put it on TV doesn't make it true.
Here in New Hampshire, the legislature has put a renewed emphasis on civics education, and we've even seen the interpretation of history come into this campaign with your comments over the Civil War. As students learn about the U.S. Constitution in particular and its role in American life, I want to ask you about one clause that's in there, the 3/5 Compromise, which essentially defined enslaved persons as just 60% of a person. As students learn about the 3/5 Compromise, should they be taught that it was racist?
So we've always had racists in our country, just like they're racists in every country. The difference is, I don't think this country was started as a racist country. And what I mean by that is, you look back at what the Declaration of Independence said. It said all men were created equal, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. America is not perfect, but we've always tried to be more perfect. That's what I want every child to know. Brown, black, other, is that we are a work in progress. Yes, there will be racism. I had it when I was growing up. I know what racism feels like. But thank goodness my parents never raised me to believe that America was a racist country, because I don't believe America is a racist country. I believe that America is the one country that's given more freedom and more hope to people than any other place in the world. I saw that at the United Nations. So what we want our kids to know is, yes, we have stains on our history, and slavery was one of them. But that does not mean our country was built on racism.
And yet, though, is that 3/5 Compromise an example of racism in the Constitution?
Yes, I mean, I think, every person should be created equally, period. And we should make sure that we always follow that. And I also think we should never stop improving. We still got work to do. But you make today better than yesterday. That's how we should focus on it.
The final week of this primary is so often about showing something to the people of New Hampshire, that you have that passion and that fire to lead. One of the great examples, of course, is former President Bill Clinton, at the time Governor Clinton. His campaign was on the ropes. He was at the Dover Elks Lodge, and he said, "I will be there for you till the last dog dies." Obviously a man of many foibles, but in that moment he showed a lot of fire, and people responded to that. The idea being that as president, you don't get to pick your fights, you just have to stand for the people. So what message do you think you sent to the people of New Hampshire when you decided not to debate this week?
Well, I think, first of all, it wasn't that I decided not to debate. I absolutely want to debate. We've had 5 strong debates. I want to continue to do that. But it's a 2-person race. It's Trump I wanted to debate. I mean, that's the focus, is if anybody's upset about that, why wouldn't Trump debate? Why wouldn't Trump talk about the fact that he put us $8 trillion in debt in just 4 years? Why didn't Trump talk about the fact that he didn't hold China accountable with fentanyl, and he praised President Xi a dozen times after they gave us COVID? Why doesn't President Trump talk about the fact that he continues to talk about all of the distractions, but he doesn't talk about what his role was in those distractions? Why don't we talk about the fact that he is yet to give us a vision for the future? All he's talked about is who he wants to get back, what he's going to do to make his life better, not Americans' lives better. That's what I want to do on a debate stage. He's yet to talk about that. And so the second he wants to get on a debate stage, I stand ready.
Is it possible you made the right decision for your campaign, but the wrong decision for the Granite State?
Who would I have debated? There's only one other person in this race. Donald Trump is the only other person in this race. We made a call out to him to debate us. He declined. What else was I supposed to do? Sit on stage by myself?
Well, Ron DeSantis obviously was going to be there.
Ron DeSantis is closer to zero than he is to me. He's single digits. He's like below 5%. I'm up in the 30s. Why would I go and debate someone down? I've done 5 debates with Ron DeSantis. That's not who I'm running against. I'm running against Donald Trump. He needed to be on that debate stage. But the bottom line is he will not defend his record. He doesn't want to defend it because he knows he can't explain the debt. He knows he can't explain why he wanted to raise taxes 25 cents on every American in 2018, why he won't say why he didn't finish the border to start with. There's a lot of things he doesn't want to answer. I wanted to have those questions and answers, and he didn't want to do that.
All right, Ambassador Haley, thank you for your time here on Close Up. We'll see you on election night.
Thanks so much.
All right.